Hi, welcome to 3 minutes and 60 seconds. I'm Rabbi Katz, and this is my weekly commentary on the Torah portion based on sermons and stories that I've told over the years. This week we are in Lech Lecha, the third Torah portion in the book of Genesis. And I'm going to share with you a slightly different take. We can often talk about this portion because we meet Abram, who later becomes Abraham. We meet Abram and we could talk about the journey from his homeland to Canaan. We could talk about the beginning of the covenant. But what I'm going to talk about today is Jewish missionhood, the why of the Jewish people. And I like to teach that if we look back in Genesis, we see that every time God has interacted with humanity, God finds out that we keep messing up. When God created Adam and Eve, one of the first things they did was sin in the garden. And so God punishes them, comes down externally, punishes them by expelling them from the garden along with other punishments. The goal of punishing them, just like the goal of a parent punishing a child, is that they will no longer mess up. They will no longer sin. They will always now forever choose right over wrong. Well, you and I know humanity better than that. We will often err toward the other side. But that notion of coming down and punishing humanity for the goal of changing our behavior was what was going through God's mind. And yet 10 generations later we come to Noah, and a generation filled with such violence and disrespect and lack of holiness that God decides he's going to start from scratch, destroy all of humanity except for the one righteous person, Noah, which will repopulate humanity. Again, the goal being all humanity moving forward and forever will be righteous because they came from Noah. That doesn't last either. The third attempt was in the generation of Babel. They built a tower reaching up to the heavens. This so angered God that God comes and destroys that project and disperses the people out to the nations of the earth, confounding their speech so they all speak different languages. We could talk about that complicated text in a different sermon. But we have 3 instances very early in Genesis where humanity comes along, sins, and God punishes. The goal of each of these punishments was, again, to create a better humanity, was to change our behavior, to move the needle from messing up to doing right. And it doesn't seem to be working. And that's when, on the 4th try, we come to this week's portion where we meet Abram. God chooses Abram and the family that Abram will create, and places that family in the midst of the families of the earth with a job. And that job is to be a holy people. It is to be exemplars of righteousness. It is to be, in the words of the later prophets, an or lagoyim, a light unto the nations. God is not going to come down and punish every time humanity messes up. Instead, God is going to provide humanity with role models. That is the mission of the Jewish people. That is the mission of Abram and Abram's family. We have a holy task. Let's be clear, we suffer for that task. Just look through our history. When the world was acting in a particularly bad way, we were the ones that had to come along and declare the right way to act. That doesn't make us very beloved in the eyes of people who didn't want to listen to us. When the world was being wrapped up in evil culture, we came along and we were a voice of counterculture. But that's the goal of the Jewish people and the task set before us. But I want to add, it's not just the Jewish people. It's anybody who has joined us in this mission. Our Christian friends and neighbors, they bring people to God. They promote holiness through their theology. Our Muslim friends and neighbors, they bring people to God through their theology. We have billions of collaborators on the planet, all promoting a message of holiness, all telling people who are sinning and who are acting inappropriately to instead choose God, to choose holiness, to choose righteousness over sin. God's not going to come down and punish us every single time, but God has put a voice within the nations of the earth to be a voice of holiness. That is our job. That's a job we should take seriously. And it all begins from this week's portion when we meet our great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather, Abram. Now go out and be Torah.